Okay, so this video is going to talk about the difference between the short run and the long run. In microeconomics, we introduce a specific way to define the short run as compared to the long run. Macroeconomics also has a distinction between the short run and the long run. That's going to be a different distinction in macroeconomics. So we'll be talking about the microeconomic distinction between short run and long run here. And we've used the term short run versus long run earlier. For instance, when we talk about the impact of a price ceiling or a price floor, we talked about the short run effects, and in the long run, we said in the long run, let's say the shortage that you have with a price ceiling gets worse. But here we give a very specific definition of the short run versus the long run. Firms produce output. They produce output using factors of production. So one way to think about what firms do is they take things like raw materials, labor, tools, and they use those to produce the goods and services that we want to consume: clothes, furniture, cooked meals, and books, and everything else we might possibly want to consume in the world. So you use inputs to produce output. There are a whole bunch of different types of inputs. If we think about these different inputs that a firm is going to use to produce output, the speed at which, how quickly you can adjust some of these inputs differs. Let's just consider, say, a labor versus a factory, a form of fixed capital. So labor, if you needed to increase the amount of labor that you required or we're going to use to produce goods or services, if you're running a business and you want to increase the amount of labor you need to have, well, you could put up a help wanted sign. You could put an ad on a job site and to try to hire workers. And depending on the type of work, but for many types of work, you could hire a new employee who could do a pretty good job relatively quickly. In fact, there's even faster ways to hire than that. If you want, you could call a temp agency that might have some people working for them. And the temp agency does is send those individuals out to a business that needs to hire and needs extra help immediately. And so if you need to hire the type of help that a temp agency might be able to help you with, you could do that very quickly. Like you could call a temp agency one day and maybe have people on working for you the next. And there's even another way you could increase the amount of labor you have very quickly, and that's ask your workers to work overtime. So you could ask them to work overtime, and you could even say, "Hey, we need you to work a couple of extra hours tonight," and you have to pay them the extra amount for overtime. But if you needed to finish a job or make something at your business, you could increase the amount of labor you're using very quickly, maybe in a matter of days, maybe if anything, perhaps a matter of weeks. There might be some very specialized types of labor that's going to take you longer to hire. If you're going to hire a CEO, you're not just going to put up a help wanted sign and hire the first person who walks in and submits a resume. But for many types of labor, you could increase the amount of labor you want to have within a couple of days, maybe a few weeks. Same for other things like, say, if you're running a restaurant, you can order more food to cook in the restaurant pretty quickly. You could order more clothes for a clothing store relatively quickly. There are other things that would take a lot longer to adjust. Think of like a factory, or think of it here on campus. Think of when the university is going to build a building. It takes a long time to build a building on campus. And it take like an entire year to build a new classroom building or a building with some offices. It could take more than that. If you're going to build a factory, again, the same thing. It could take you a year or more to build a factory, especially if it's a factory where you're going to have a bunch of really sophisticated machines and robots in that factory, and to get all that stuff, to get the factory built and the robots all ordered and everything up and running, it might take 2 or 3 years. So if you want to think about it, you've got labor that could be adjusted in a matter of days or weeks, and then you've got capital that might take months or years to adjust. So that means that there's going to be an economically relevant period of time. If you're running a business, you realize we could maybe hire more labor, but we can't increase the amount of capital we're using. There's a period of time which I could think about that. And so you'd have to ask a different question. Do I want to try to increase output in the near term or in the short run when you can only hire, say, more labor, but you can't increase the size of your factory? So that allows us to make a distinction. We're going to call some inputs variable and some inputs fixed. And so the variable inputs are going to be the ones that you can vary, and then the fixed inputs would be the things like a factory or heavy machinery that you can't vary very quickly. So the short run is going to be this period of time. We won't say exactly how long it is because it might differ from different businesses, but it's that period of time. Like, okay, but if it take you a couple of weeks to hire labor and it's going to take you 6 months to adjust capital, it's that like 5.5 months or so in between there. So it's a period of months, maybe even a couple of years, in which you can adjust labor, but you can't adjust capital. So the short run is going to be a period of time in which some factors of production are fixed. The long run is a period of time in which all factors of production are variable. Okay, so there is our definition. In one sense, it's very precise. In another sense, it's less precise because we're not going to say exactly how long is the short run. Well, it's, depending on the type of business, it might be the case that the short run's a pretty short period of time. If you're not using any kinds of really specialized machinery in a line of work, or you don't have any really specialized types of labor, you might be able to vary all of your inputs within a few weeks. But again, in other cases, there might be a period of months, possibly even years, in which you say like some inputs you can vary some inputs, but there's at least one you can't vary. And so, for our purposes here in this class, you can think of a firm producing output using two things: labor and capital. And so, labor is going to be our variable input in the short run. The capital is going to be the fixed input or fixed factor of production. Now, once we make that distinction over the period of time when we talk about, quote, the short run, since some factors of production are fixed, we can distinguish between fixed and variable costs. And in one sense, this is straightforward. Whatever the full costs are that are associated with the fixed inputs, those would be the fixed costs. So if you've built a factory and you have a loan out to pay for that factory, it's so whatever the cost of servicing that loan that you have for the factory over the next year, and that would be your fixed cost over the next year. Variable costs are going to be the cost of labor, other inputs, whatever you can vary in the short run. And so you take the wage rate multiplied by the number of hours of labor you have, the variable cost. So pretty straightforward to assign costs to these two categories based on whether the input's fixed or variable. And then that's going to be the total cost. And then the other thing we can do is, I had a video before, it introduced the idea of an average cost. Average cost is a cost per unit. Well, we have three different sums of costs here, or types of costs here. We could think of dividing each of these by Q, by the amount of output that the firm produces. In which case we have average total cost. That would be the total cost divided by Q. And then we have average fixed cost, we call that AFC, and then average variable cost. And so we'd have this expression as well. So we have total costs are the sum of fixed costs plus variable costs. And then we can also talk about the average total cost being the sum of the average fixed cost and the average variable cost. If you're good with math, and if you've got this equation, you can divide both sides of this equation by Q, and that gives you just rewriting these, realizing that those are then average costs. So you have that. So we have a way to define the short run versus the long run. We can give it some precision here. The short run being a period of time in which at least some factors of production are fixed. And then we know the long run is enough time that you can vary all factors of production. So that's what we mean by the short run. In the next video, will show us what the short run cost curves for a firm look like.